Thank you everybody for joining. Again, this is supply chain special reports from Resilinc on COVID-19 and the Omicron variant. We'd like to welcome you and give you a better perspective of the agenda. Today's agenda is we'll be covering COVID-19 updates from 2020 to now and how the Omicron variant has disrupted and continues to disrupt throughout, from our perspective, throughout 2022. We'll update you on the global supply chain and what is occurring in more of the regional perspectives. We'll do a deep dive into Asia's supply chain and the commodity disruptions that we see, as well as we'll look at some of the new technologies that we're putting into place from Resilinc Solutions, as well as introducing a couple of our new programs, including supply chain special reports. The conference call format is fairly simple. It's 30 minutes presentation, updates, and a 15-minute Q&A. We want to make it brief and clear with clear, concise data to allow you guys to get better understanding and how to mitigate and the challenges in front of you. Before we start, let me give a little background on myself. My name is Jigar Shah. I'm the Vice President of Marketing. I've been in supply chain for 15 years for large enterprises like Hewlett Packard, Sun Microsystems, Fairchild Semiconductor, Oracle, as well as small startups like Bstock and now Resilinc. I manage all product marketing, corporate marketing, and partner marketing. And I'm really excited to welcome our special guest today, Shahzaib Khan. Shahzaib, are you there?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Very excited to have you.
So Shahzaib, let me give you a little background on Shahzaib Khan. He has been managing he's a senior director of product and data. Shahzaib is single-handedly responsible for maintaining and innovating all data products, including Commodity Watch, Logistic Watch, and EventWatch. Managing under Shahzaib's management, he's in guidance. He has been able to build the data platforms across Resilinc that monitors has millions of news sources that monitors on a daily basis. Shahzaib, on an annual basis, his team monitors more than 3.2 billion individual news feeds to help companies like yours to be able to mitigate and identify and mitigate any upcoming solutions and actionable notifications and supply chain disruption across the globe. Shahzaib, did I miss anything there, Shahzaib? Because I know you do a lot there.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add is most of the products that I manage at Resilinc, they are all AI based.
Very good point, Shahzaib. So Shahzaib, we're super excited to have you, and I know this is a really hard time for you and your team as there's so much going on. So why don't we just jump right into it, Shahzaib? And why don't you give us a perspective of what you're seeing right now across what you saw in the beginning of COVID and what you're seeing now, and what you're potentially seeing in the future?
Sure, and yes, you correctly mentioned that it has been a very tough 2 years, 2020 and 2021, for my team, carrying the responsibility of such a big, complex supply chain network that serves into 26 plus industries that we are catering to today. Talking about COVID, we all know that this is that big black swan event that we all have been talking about for years, even before the pandemic hit. We've read about it in a lot of books. We heard about it over a lot of conferences. That big black swan event that companies are always preparing for, and always missing the smaller, more frequent events. Supply chain practitioners and risk experts have been extremely busy and consumed by this disruption that stemmed out of a small outbreak that recently that actually started on 27th December 2019 and then strengthened into a big pandemic, global pandemic event. And especially 2020, where we were not aware, where we were not sure how to really manage it. It was the difficult year for a lot of companies and corporates around the world. It was an extremely disruptive year. Majority, if not all, organizations did not know how and what to address in a timely manner. There were a lot of unknowns. 2021, while things changed, of course, our response and techniques improved. We became more informed. We now have a lot more knowledge and visibility. We are more aggressive in finding ways to mitigate supply chain issues. Disruptions continue to increase. With all that knowledge, all that experience, there are still more and more disruptions with the situation already so complex and complicated due to all the COVID lockdowns and restrictions. 2021 also introduced its own different nature of disruptions that made things a lot more worse. Of course, a lot of situations are influenced by the restrictions and lockdowns and the pandemic year. But the war against emission, then you have global energy crisis, you have skyrocketing operational cost, you have port congestion, warehouse shortages, container shortages, raw material shortages, labor shortage made things worse. Then you have anti-vaccine protests. Then you have a significant increase in factory fires, shutdowns, production cuts. And a very interesting observation that we have from the past 3 months COVID data is that Omicron has actually caused a lot more disruptions as compared to the same period in 2020. And I'm talking about November, December, and early January data. It actually led to more lockdowns restrictions than the previous variants created during the same time. And of course, the nature and the severity of these lockdowns and restrictions has changed. They're less severe, they're more manageable, but we are still observing a lot of suppliers and sites confirming disruptions.
That brings up a good question. Why is there so many localized disruptions? I mean, factory fires are still number one as the most disruptive supply chain risk type across the globe. I mean, let's focus on Asia and during COVID, Jose. What do you think?
Yeah, factory fire has always been the number one event. I think apart from 2016, where mergers and acquisitions actually, took the top spot, every other year factory fire is always the leading disruption. In COVID years 2020 and 2021, the increase in factory fires and localized disruptions is, of course, it's influenced by all the lockdowns, the unavailability of your trained labor, a lot of inspections that could not happen, a lot of the situations where the localized inspections when you have a special project, like for example some kind of welding project is ongoing, what kind of homework you need to do, what kind of monitoring you need to do, a lot of shortcuts in maintaining those processes. So there are a lot of different situations that actually catered to increased factory fire and disruption activities.
That makes it very interesting. So that goes back to my broader question, which is how many suppliers are in danger? I mean, what is the concern from a global perspective with the Omicron variant?
Yeah, if we just look at all the disruptions that Omicron created over the past 2.5 months, you're looking at around 150,000 supplier locations across 32 different countries. that were actually flagged by Resilinc in different nature of disruptions. For example, lockdowns, travel restrictions, for example, border restrictions, a lot of production cuts and shutdowns, a lot of labor disruptions, cargo disruptions. We have also observed a lot of profit warnings and bankruptcies, a lot of legal actions, recalls, fines, and of course the monster of all energy crisis, which is impacting a lot of companies around the world, especially the skyrocketing cost of energy. These 150,000 supplier locations that I talked about, they have around 1.5 million parts mapped to them. And then when we analyzed these locations deeply, we have around 43 different activities that are happening or that are mapped to these locations across 32 countries. And some of these activities include manufacturing, assembling, warehousing, distribution, fabrication, a lot of testing facilities, a lot of plating and finishing facilities, medical testing facilities, a lot of R&D facilities, a lot of recycling facilities, a lot of software solution suppliers that have confirmed disruptions during the Omicron 2.5 months period.
So Shatay, one of the things that would be interesting is now that from 2020 to 2021, we see lockdowns being a less of a tool for governments to use, but using more travel and manufacturing restrictions. It seems like that's growing as a pattern. Is that the same thing you guys see?
Yeah, some Asian countries are more aggressive as compared to the rest of the world. We do still see lockdowns in Asian countries. We have also observed some lockdowns in European countries as well, but Asian countries are more aggressive in responding to the spikes. For example, China restricted 13 million plus people from leaving their homes. Malaysia restricted companies to 30% indoor and 50% outdoor labor. Same thing happened in Vietnam. A lot of restrictions around what percentage of labor you can have indoors and outdoors. A lot of border crossing restrictions that is slowing down the trade. A lot of restrictions around the international travel. For example, Singapore cut down the number of international travels. A lot of Asian countries are still very aggressive in terms of how the spikes happened and how quickly they respond.
So tell us what we're seeing here in this chart. Give us a better understanding. This is really interesting stuff.
Yeah, so the 32 countries I talked about that had some level of restrictions implemented because of the to stop the spread of the virus. If you go to the next slide, it will give you a better understanding of. Can we go to the next slide? So these over 32 countries that reimpose some sort of restrictions to stop the spread, including China, Japan, India, UK, Hong Kong, Australia, Italy, Israel, Canada, Germany. A lot of countries that reimposed these restrictions have suppliers and locations that confirmed some level of impact. Resilinc created around 49 war rooms across these 32 countries. And please note, Resilinc creates a supply chain event war room for customers where their supplier locations are directly involved in a disruption. So there were 49 war rooms created just for Omicron. And an interesting thing that we do is we also contact your suppliers in the region to check if their sites are impacted or not. For Omicron, suppliers from various countries and industries confirmed that their sites are impacted due to various situations that were actually influenced by the new variant. For example, reimposed restrictions, shutdowns, production cuts, cargo, labor disruptions. Outbreak among labor is the biggest concern. Then, of course, force majeures and issues at sub-tier suppliers also impacting the tier one suppliers. Automotive, aerospace, healthcare, a lot of industries, logistics, consumer electronics, medical device, they're all heavily impacted. We have observed supplier impact confirmation across almost all industries.
So Shazib, can you give us an example of what that would look like? Like what is a confirmation that you're looking at, a supplier impact that you're looking at?
Yeah, so when we observe a disruption, we of course analyze the region. We analyze what kind of supplier presence we have in the region, what kind of locations we have in the region, what kind of parts coming from that region. We create a war room for the customer that have supplier presence in that region. This war room actually helps them get engaged with the supplier, get engaged with internal stakeholders, start assessing the impact. And in the process of creating this war room, we also contact your supplier and request a small questionnaire, kind of a survey from the supplier, which automatically gets triggered and asks the supplier, these are your locations in this region where Resilinc has identified a disruption. Dear supplier, please tell your customer how these locations are impacted. And supplier is able to see which customers are requesting impact for which locations. Supplier is able to provide a brief comment or a kind of a commentary how we are impacted. Supplier is able to select the sites, which sites are impacted, and provide a recovery time, how long it will take us to recover this location. And that's what the supplier impact confirmation is, and that's what we have observed in Omicron. Of course, we have been observing impact confirmations throughout pandemic, but we have observed an increase in Omicron variant.
That's great to know. I mean, that's great to understand as there's more localized disruptions that our audience should be aware of. So one of the things that we really want to do a deep dive on, Shazib, as we understand, 40% of all global manufacturing output comes from the Asia Pacific region. Can we do a little bit more of a deep dive of what is the risk associated to the Asian countries that we have manufacturing in?
I think by now we are well aware that Asian countries are more aggressive in responding to even a small spike. Even 10 new cases can lead to a city shutting down. And several countries in Asia have identified cases and implemented restrictions. You have Cambodia, you have China, Hong Kong, India, Japan. You have 7 out of 10 ASEAN zone countries. And what we've learned throughout the pandemic is that travel restrictions and frequent lockdowns actually impact the trade flows. Companies globally have confirmed that these freshly imposed restrictions in China and Hong Kong hampered their component supply chain. A lot of automotive and consumer electronic companies confirmed supply chain disruptions because of these fresh restrictions. These restrictions also resulted in a lot of driver and truck shortages, a lot of air and international travel restrictions, a lot of bans on various airlines coming from different countries. In China, over 16 million people were disrupted or affected because of some level of stay indoor restrictions. India also, it's the one of the biggest economies in the world, and in Asia they also had a lot of flight and international travel restrictions. What very interesting thing that we observed in India was that a lot of their manufacturers, they were preferring stockpiling. They were placing longer term orders, some in additional months of orders, to avoid any bottlenecks due to the Omicron variant. And another thing that we observed in India, and that's because the congestion at the US and UK ports, is that the rate of container in India increased by 10 to 15%. Vietnam, which is already struggling with the economic loss of around $37 billion, saw a decline in economic growth to 2.5% because of the Omicron variant. A lot of companies reported that custom clearance in Vietnam has become more and more difficult. A lot of the countries in Asia, for example, you have Thailand, you have Philippines, you have Singapore, Cambodia. A lot of these countries are facing some damage to the economic recovery. So we have to closely monitor the next few quarters, especially with the Omicron still very active, and also the other situations, for example, Russia-Ukraine situation, and how that affects the oil and energy cost. Several, economists have expressed concern regarding the Omicron impact over the economic rebound, GDP, and growth. Asian countries, especially, that observed some rebound in GDP, they're already facing difficulties again due to the impact to manufacturing, travel and tourism, aviation, impact at the border crossings and trade, fluctuations in raw material availability and demand. We are also hearing some news coming from China that they are planning to dismantle their biggest real estate company. We are also monitoring and assessing the situation, situation between Russia and Ukraine. We all know that Russia plays a very big role in the supply of, energy commodities. In case of any sanctions that will be placed by the rest of the world, global economy and the rebound that we keep talking about can be severely impacted. Now, China, whenever we talk about China, we talk about a global manufacturer. Of course, China is the leading manufacturer. It contributes to the world economy. It's the factory, global factory, some say, but we have to also think about China being a very big consumer market as well, and a lot of small Asian countries around China. The biggest market for them is actually China. A lot of revenue is associated, with that market, and if there are restrictions there, for example, the zero COVID approach that the Chinese have been following, which means that extensive testing, contact tracing, a lot of border restrictions, travel restrictions, a lot of monitoring of the ships and cargo at the ports. it actually slows down the economy, not just in China, but in the surrounding countries as well, and impact their revenue as well. And then we have Winter Olympics coming. We have a new Chinese New Year coming, which means a massive holiday demand, and which will lead to labor restrictions, labor shortages, a lot of very aggressive restrictions at the factories, staff cuts, shutdowns, suspended services at feeder ports. A lot of these smaller ports that serve into big ports, there are a lot of disruptions at those smaller ports as well. We call them feeder ports. A lot of labor shortages there. A lot of restrictions around ground and air and ship crews, a lot of restrictions over trucks entering terminals. Several companies, including Samsung, Micron, reported that the lockdown in Xi'an, a city of 13 million people, have impacted their manufacturing, which can lead to impacts to chip again. Toyota, Volkswagen, and other automotive companies that have assembly plants, in Tianjin, they had to shut down because of the reimposed restrictions. We have seen, during 2020 pandemic lockdowns and then the energy crisis as well, we have seen that how disruptions in China lead to increased difficulties and bottlenecks in the global supply chain. And there are several countries that also, of course, export into Chinese economy and have revenue associated with that economy. Now we talk about big black swan events. We talked about COVID. We've been talking about these big black swan events like the tsunami in Japan, events like the Tianjin explosion, events like the pandemic. But that doesn't mean that the non-COVID disruptions have stopped. Several non-COVID challenges are also threatening global supply chain. Of course, Omicron has made things worse, but factory fires, disruptions, which were the leading event type in 2021. We recorded 129% increase in factory fire and disruptions. Material and utility shortage events recorded 452% increase. 156% increase in labor shortages, 143% increase in cybersecurity events. If you go back to 2014-15, we didn't even have cybersecurity, and today it's one of the leading supply chain disruption events. 186% increase in force majeures. Of course, a lot of influence coming from COVID, a lot of influence coming from energy shortage, a lot of influence coming from the taxes freeze. Then you have 256% increase in labor violation, which covers child labor, illegal workforce, and that nature of events. We have observed 256% increase in such events. Almost every event type has recorded an increase across all industries, and of course, on the top of that, there's a developing situation in Russia and Ukraine. Inflation rates are skyrocketing. Energy cost has already affected several regions and industries. We are well aware of the material shortages that are becoming extremely difficult to manage. Then you have labor shortages, and then you have different nature of business and restructuring announcements that keep coming up. Over the 11,000 disruptions that Resilinc reported in 2021, 60% of them affected a supplier or location directly.
So Shazib, this is really shocking news, which is again not to be shocked, but it's pretty evident that there's so many localized disruptions on top of the global disruptions that we already see too. Now, how do we deal with from the raw material perspective? I mean, there's so much commodities and rare earth minerals, raw materials. I mean, is there something that you can give us insights on?
Yes, yes. The new product that we launched earlier this year, the Commodity Watch AI, it actually monitors 100 plus variables, and it provides, in a nutshell, it provides you a prediction, for on the material availability, material demand, and what will happen to the price. And there are several challenges in the commodity watch, in the material market. You will see a lot of red color on this slide. All this red color is indicating risk. Only there's one commodity where we have observed some opportunity, which is highlighted as green, is silver, where there may be some price decrease, but every other commodity, every other material that we are monitoring, we are observing a lot of risk factors that will influence the availability or influence the demand, and the prices will go up. And of course, some of these leading factors are energy cost, labor shortages, raw material shortages, a lot of post-pandemic activity. For example, your GDP starts going up. China, India GDP goes up. It affects a lot of commodities. Then you have a lot of uncertainty around inflation. You have uncertainty around what will happen to the interest rates. Then you have uncertainty around where the copper is headed, what rules Chile is planning around the new copper capacity. A lot of different variables that continue to impact these materials. And you can see a 60-day trajectory here, and I'm seeing all red other than silver.
This is great stuff, Shazeb. I mean, really, this is great for our audience to understand. So give us a little bit of a better understanding of how the Resilinc solution works. So we can think of it on a high level, how we can mitigate both proactive and reactively.
Yeah, at the very top, you put the word visibility, and then you just start breaking it down. The most important word is visibility. And visibility comes from knowing where your parts are made, where your parts are stored, where the locations are, where they fabricated, where they printed, which suppliers influence them, which sub-tier suppliers are serving into these parts. So having that kind of visibility, we call it N-tier visibility, where you know where your tier 1 sites are, what parts are coming from these sites, which ports, which airports influence those parts, what kind of raw materials these parts are using. Are these raw materials coming from sub-tier contractors, or sub-tier suppliers? What kind of recovery times? So there's a lot of mapping that Resilinc provides to its customers at tier 1 and tier level, and that provides you opportunities of being proactive, where you can at the beginning of a year, sit down, make a plan based on these are the 10 suppliers that I want to target this year, and I want to make them more resilient. Or this is the region that I want to target this year, and I want to have less dependence on this region. Or these are the 25 parts that are more critical for me, and this year this is what I want to target, and I want to do everything to bring the risk score down. That's the kind of proactive approach that you can have once you have this visibility available. Next slide. And then, Resilinc keeps you informed about all the disruptions that are happening within your supply chain networks, including your indirect suppliers, direct suppliers, sub-tier suppliers, even the suppliers that you may not have mapped yet. We try to keep you informed. For example, a plastic supplier, or a labeling supplier, or a cargo company, that maybe serves into your supply chain. You may not have mapped it on Resilinc platform, but if a disruption happens, we will connect the dots and we will keep you informed. Now, in the process of this reactive approach, you can create your playbooks, you can collaborate with your suppliers, and bring these disruptions to closure. You can start your mitigations and stay ahead of your competition, especially in saving the capacity.
So one of the questions that we have a lot of good questions, Shazib, and one of the good questions, and before you jump into this slide is, we looked at the commodities and all the commodities that you suggested that are concerning. But is there one or a few commodities that concern you more? As Tesla and Apple just, one of the things that they announced in their earnings call was they're still having supply chain issues. Do you see the semiconductor, commodities that are associated with semiconductor laxing news soon, or is there any good news, or what was the projection from your standpoint?
Yeah, so we have observed some automotive companies reopening some operations, reopening some of the shifts that they initially canceled, which have some signs of semiconductor supply chain, becoming better or recovering. But then there are a lot of commodities that are still very much influenced by the global events. For example, the energy crisis, right? The energy crisis, it's of course it will impact aluminum because it is the biggest energy consumer and the biggest emission creator. So aluminum will be confirmed impacted for maybe some time until we really figure out a better way of smelting aluminum. And then you also have a lot of other commodities that may not be on the top of the risk list. For example, silicon, right? It was never on the top of our risk list because the capacity and the availability. But what happened to silicon in Q3 because of the energy shortage and energy crisis was surprising, and it can happen to any other industry that is heavy on the energy. Their cost will go up at some point. They will have to probably cut production. The energy supply will be disrupted, and God forbid if the escalation happens between Russia and Ukraine. You have China that is taking energy from them. You have a lot of European countries that are taking gas supplies from Russia. You have, Russia is also the second biggest exporter of oil. So what I'm seeing for the raw materials is the energy biggest issue.
That's interesting that you say that. So that's something that goes into how do we justify ROI? One of the things that we do in Resilinc is really provide ROI based off data and the data that we see associated to your suppliers. As everybody is, I think Shazib clearly stated, there's a new normal in supply chain and how you manage your supply chain. And that includes both transportation, events, all across financial risk, everything. And what we want to know, we want to make sure you understand is when you work with Resilinc, it's really based on investing in a tool, a platform that can build now and the data that can build for the future too. And so here are just clear examples of why visibility is so clear. And I think Shazib, you did a great job explaining that. I know for the interest of time, we want to make sure that we go through a couple of the questions that are here, Shazib. So one of the questions is, what do you anticipate as the biggest potential disruptors in 2022 from your experience so far?
Yeah, one advice that I always, give to my colleagues and customers as well is that not just focus on the big black swan events. There are a lot of smaller, more frequent events, that can also have major disruptions. For example, factory fires. You can, if I talk about semiconductor, what happened at a tier 3 supplier, Nitobo, and then Asahi, these were considered maybe small events, but the ripple effect was big on semiconductor supply. Then you have a lot of regulatory changes, around emissions, the rate of emissions. There will be some price bands introduced. Then you have energy crisis still boiling. Then you have a lot of companies relocating their supply chain. So we have to keep an eye on that as well, how it affects your parts, your supply chain. A lot of business announcements, a lot of companies merging, a lot of companies selling or splitting, which is not an immediate impact, but in 6 to 12 months, you will have to keep an eye on how they manage and merge their supply chains, how they consolidate their supply chains, and what the impact will be for you. Then the cyber attacks and information security events are also increasing. We have observed a significant increase in cyber related disruptions happening at suppliers, happening at companies. So we'll have to keep an eye on that as well.
Yeah, and this is great information to have. And again, Shazay, thank you for your time. This has been super helpful. And there are several other questions, but we'll take them offline, Shazay, with you and respond directly to the individuals. One thing I do want to say, and again, thank you, Shazay, for your time. But one thing I do want to say is we recently introduced in January a new program called Supply Chain Special Reports. These are a series of reports that have interrelated, where it goes from commodity, region to global disruptions. And what we did was we interrelated these reports where you guys have access to our deep dive data knowledge and research knowledge. And so all you have to do is go talk to if you're a customer, go talk to your CSM or your customer your Resilinc representative. If you're not a customer, you still can have access to this. Just submit a request for this at specialreports@resilinc.com. We'll send that to you in a sample report to you in the email that we provide post this call. Again, Shazay, thank you for your time. This was awesome. This was great.
Sure.
Super helpful. And again, audience, thank you for your time and your questions, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for your time.